Okay, hello. My name's Chris Bennewith. I'm the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Business at the University of Plymouth, and I'm joined with Elaine, who's the CEO of the National Marine Park in Plymouth. There we go, lovely pictures of us. So we're going to spend about 15 minutes talking to you about Plymouth Sound National Marine Park and its aspirations around innovation for people, planet and prosperity. Now, we've tried to do something clever/stupid with our presentation, which is as soon as I push this button, a 15-minute video is going to run, and we're going to have to try and stay to time on it, a bit like a peachy coocher. So we'll see how it goes. It could be a complete disaster, but bear with me. I'm going to take a sort of David Attenborough narration type approach to it, whereas Elaine, who's much braver than I, is going to take a much more improv and freeform approach. So it's the middle bit that's going to go tits up, basically. Okay. So without further ado, we'll get started. Okay. So to quote Rita Mae Brown, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. For decades, we've tried to regenerate our coastal communities in the UK with the same old playbook: short-term projects, siloed interventions, and top-down decisions. It hasn't worked. So what if regeneration came out of the blue? What if we purposefully reconnected our coastal cities and towns with the sea? What if we viewed our urban and marine environments holistically and looked at the sea as a driver of both social and economic innovation, using the ocean as an opportunity to create a sense of place and community in some of the poorest and most disenfranchised towns in the UK? What if we treated our marine environment as an innovation district in and of itself, where we could drive new social and economic activity in, on and around the water? This presentation looks at an experimental model in Plymouth that is trying to do exactly that. So let's be honest, past efforts failed. Our coastal communities, despite their rich heritage and enormous potential, they faced chronic and multi-generational underinvestment in infrastructure, education and healthcare. Government interventions have been piecemeal and short-term, often focused on urban centres and major cities, while ignoring the unique challenges of coastal towns. Challenges such as seasonal jobs, poor transportation links, high unemployment with low productivity, and housing instability. The result: coastal communities often experience lower life expectancy and higher rates of chronic disease compared to the national average. There's often economic stagnation caused by high unemployment, a reliance on seasonal tourism, and a lack of diverse skilled jobs with low productivity rates. And lastly, demographic issues. There is often an ageing population in coastal communities with an outmigration of young people and a high proportion of seasonal transient residents, which leads to fragile social infrastructure. This isn't just neglect, it's a failure of strategy. In Plymouth, we can trace this back to the beginning of our post-war era, where the city had ambitions but delayed plans. Plymouth's 1943 plan for reconstruction envisaged a modern city centre with wide boulevards, zoned districts and integrated transport. However, much of this vision was delayed or watered down, leaving gaps in development. There was a dependence on the dockyard. The city remained tied to Devonport Dockyard and the Royal Navy. As Britain's naval power declined, Plymouth's economy shrank and diversification into other industries was limited. There was short-sighted industrial policy. National policy encouraged industries to relocate to Plymouth temporarily to ease unemployment, but many firms left once subsidies ended. This created instability rather than long-term prosperity. The city also experienced housing and urban challenges. Wartime destruction left thousands homeless, rebuilding was slow, and many families lived in poor quality housing for decades, undermining social progress. And lastly, the city's peripheral location. Plymouth was geographically isolated compared to other industrial centres. Investment flowed to cities like Birmingham and London, while Plymouth struggled to attract private capital. Back to the present day, however, and if we truly believe in powering up Britain, then we must commit to long-term targeted investment that gives these coastal communities the future they deserve. Because right now, what do we see? Coastal regeneration schemes which are fragmented, competitive and short-lived, forcing communities to fight for scraps of funding rather than building sustainable futures. enterprise zones and free ports which promise prosperity, but in reality they only deliver tax breaks for big businesses, not real benefits for local people. We have marine protected areas which are protected in name only. 90% still allow destructive practices that undermine biodiversity and the livelihoods of those who depend on healthy seas. Meanwhile, climate change accelerates, sea levels rise, biodiversity collapses, and the coastal community remain among the most deprived in the UK. In fact, Plymouth is in the top 20% of the most deprived areas in the UK. We've heard a lot of that here today. Doing nothing is not an option. Doing the same thing is madness. We need a new approach, one that listens to local voices, invests in skills and education, and builds resilient economies rooted in the strengths of these places. And here's the truth. Regeneration cannot be imposed from the top down. It has to start with people. We've heard that from Rebecca earlier. Grassroots and community-led initiatives are vital because they understand the lived reality and felt reality of these places. They know what works and what doesn't. When local people are empowered to shape their future, projects succeed, not just economically, but socially and culturally. Connection to place matters. Coastal communities have a deep sense of identity tied to the sea, to heritage, to landscape. When regeneration respects and strengthens that connection, it builds pride and belonging, and creative activity plays a huge role in this. Art, culture, and creativity aren't just luxuries, they're catalysts for change. They bring people together, tell stories, and attract visitors. They help communities imagine new futures and give young people reasons to stay and invest their talent locally. If we get this right, we don't just transform coastal towns, we strengthen the whole country. So let's stop talking about powering up Britain and start doing it. Let's give our coastal communities the future they deserve. Elaine.
Thanks, Chris. And here's how we start to change the story. How do we change what has happened? We can't. But how do we shape and change our future? Plymouth Sound National Marine Park is the first of its kind in the UK. It is not a designation. It has not been thrust upon the people of Plymouth. It has been chosen by Plymouth and the city as a new way where we might be able to start addressing some of the challenges that we face. The UK has been an island nation for 8,000 years, and yet we still turn our back on the sea. I know that in a past life I was a mermaid. I may, in my future life, also be a mermaid, but I want it to be connected to my coastal community. So the marine park is the blue bit. It's not the people bit, it's the blue bit. And arguably, very few people live in the blue bit, but they do live next to it. And that's where the change starts to happen. So what are the goals of the park? Well, it's not quite like a national park, because we've changed that because we believe that this has 3 strands to its delivery, and in those 3 strands is where our strength lies. Because we know that thriving communities, successful businesses, a fantastic environment, and our social mobility are the core to what we need to deliver in order to be able to have a successful and thriving city. So our vision is a place where people and planet come together to realise a truly sustainable future. So it is about improving outcomes for young people, but also for old people. It is about education, but it's not just the education of the young, it's the education for all. Rebecca earlier talked about the felt place-based attachment, and there's a great academic term for it, which you can all go and look up later, which is called thalassophilia. But what I call it is aware, care, do. So for me, it's about if you're aware of your environment and you value that environment, then you develop feelings for that environment. And in those feelings for that environment, you develop an attachment to place and a pride in place that changes how you think about things. I'm probably a little bit unusual in this room in that I'm actually a marine scientist and I am slightly fish out of water. So if you see me struggling, just come and pop me back in somewhere. There's some keys out there I believe would do. But what's really important for me is the fact that conservationists for years have been restoring the natural environment, but forgetting that the reason the natural environment needs restoring is people. So if we work by, with and through people, then we can resolve the issues in our natural environment and we can help support and sustain communities at the same time. But the Marine Park is also a commitment to creativity and culture, because we know that in order to meet people where they're at, we need to understand what it is that drives them to be attached. Now, for me, as I said, I was a mermaid in a past life and I swim all of the time in the sea. And that's how I am attached. But we also know that people are attached through the wonders of art, through attending festivals, through painting things on pavements, through any way that they wish to be attached. And what we're trying to do with the National Marine Park is not prescribe, it's to offer, to say to people, how would you like to be connected to your marine environment? How can we change the outcomes for you? And for some of that, it is profoundly upsetting in the sense that when we go and reach out and embed ourselves into our communities, we find that they don't have the time for that. They don't have the time for it because actually they haven't got enough food for their kids. So we actually have to work in an integrated way that recognises that many of the problems we have are so complex and so interrelated that we can't simply pick off one bit and say, this is how we're going to do things. We have to ask our communities and then try and enable and support them in the best way that we possibly can. And doing nothing is not an option. I could talk to you about the demise in wildlife across the world. I could talk about the UK being one of the most nature disconnected places in the world. What a tragedy and a travesty for a beautiful island nation. But as Chris said, many of the interventions in the past have been very fragmented and short term. And what we're trying to do is to change that. And with that comes a huge amount of complexity and a need to have people, great people like Chris and others from the university, to help and support us, because sometimes our heads just explode with how difficult it can be. But we see the change and the initiative as something that can be successful for 6 really good reasons. First, it's about creative place-based innovation. So it's about not assuming you know the answer. It's about listening more than speaking, and understanding that our communities are wonderfully diverse, challenging, complex places and spaces, and that in itself is to be celebrated. Secondly, connecting communities to the sea. So we have learned through the work we've done with the National Marine Park already that people are frightened of the sea. I think that's very relatable if you can't swim. And many of our young people can't swim, and actually their parents can't either. We've also found that it's an expensive place to get to. And even if you can get there cheaply, it's an expensive place to run the gauntlet of the stalls and the coffee shops and so on. So we need to think very deeply and hard about how we can help with those barriers. We're looking at working much more digitally. And Hannah, who's in the audience, I'm sure will be really happy to talk to you about the See for Yourself programme. So that's reaching out using new and innovative immersive technology, a means by which we can say, maybe your connection to the sea is through a screen, not through being in it. And that's really important. We have to listen to our communities and understand what their barriers are, because we only really affect meaningful change by doing so, and we need to plot new routes by which we can support our communities. We can do some of that by delivering in their communities and close to where they are, so taking things to them rather than expecting them to rock up. But that's still a lot of work, and we know that parachuting in solutions is not the way forward. Next, we need to look at long-term governance and funding. There's never enough money. We know this. But we need to find other ways, and one of the big parts of my work is looking at new and original funding models by which we can find the money to work and to continue developing marine parks. Because although Plymouth is the first, I'm also working around the coastline of England with loads of passionate, incredible people who also want to be a national marine park, because they recognise that this can be a grassroots movement for change and inclusive growth. Chris? Go.
Okay. So, as Elaine's described there, this isn't a theory. It's happening right now. We have seagrass restoration projects, which are rebuilding ecosystems and engaging volunteers. We have a blue economy skills hub, which is training local people for marine tech ideas. I think we've talked a lot, or a lot has been talked about this morning around the kind of social and cultural, but actually the marine park is a really key location for driving economic activity as well as social and cultural activity. And we have a digital engagement through our See for Yourself programme, which is working with digital artists and communities to rekindle a sense of pride, create a connection with place, and provide new opportunities for careers in the creative industries. These projects prove that Plymouth Sound National Marine Park is not just a concept, it's a working model for inclusive growth and innovation. The UK's first national marine park isn't just a place, it's a movement. The future belongs to those who dare to imagine differently, and it starts here. Innovation for people, planet, and prosperity. And if we get it right, it won't just transform Plymouth, it will create a blueprint for coastal renewal across the UK. We have a vision for thriving, creative, and innovative coastal communities across the UK. Join us and end the madness. Thank you.